This series, Some Local History, is dedicated to Joyce O'Haron, my wife, for 57 years after we met on Highland Lake. In 2003, when Joyce and I retired and returned to our home in Winsted from our travels, we purchased 5 neighboring lots at Highland Lake from the families of 2 friends from my childhood, Adelbert and William LaTulip. When the property finally came up for sale, after being in their families, one way or another, for 43 years or more. On the 2 waterfront lots was situated a very old bungalow in reasonable condition for its age, but fairly dilapidated. It was in need of a great deal of work. It was not in livable condition and was unsafe for many reasons. Originally, there was a bathhouse with 4 stalls, but it was torn down years earlier when a seawall was constructed on the property. The bungalow home of Caleb Beach, the first settler of Winchester, is remarkably similar in structure to the bungalow that Joyce and I purchased from our neighbors. The photo was probably taken by Frank H. DeMars, a contemporary or perhaps an earlier photographer in the early 1900s. The bungalow had several owners over the years and had been well used. It had town sewer and water, a propane heater, and a nice stone fireplace with an oak mantel with what is left of the original bark. It once had a screened-in front porch that was enclosed some time long ago. The porch was rotting and full of black carpenter ants. There was a small sleeping loft on the lake side of the building with a small rickety staircase that dropped down for access to a very small sleeping and storage area under the eaves. There was a large 25 by 25 foot deck outside of the closed-in porch that was used for swimming, diving, and fishing, but the cedar planks and their wooden infrastructure and diving board have been removed and not yet replaced. The lake water is 8 feet deep near the deck and increasing rapidly to greater depths towards the center of the lake. Being interested in the history of Highland Lake and the town of Winchester, I began to search the land records in Town Hall and various historical documents at the historical room of the Beardsley Ann Memorial Library for information about the history of the bungalow, its former owners, and its property. Using town land records at the Town Hall and documents that I found in the historical room of the library with the help of research assistant Verna Gilson, I traced the bungalow's origin back to the early 1900s. The construction was done then, but I couldn't find the exact date that the bungalow was erected. There are 2 interesting pamphlets available in the library records. An old pamphlet from 1910 called A Trip Around Highland Lake, dated Friday, June 24th, 1910, and another titled Highland Lake Lures Hundreds to Its Shores, dated August 19, 1921. There were other records and early city directories of Winsted that go back well into the 1800s that give names and addresses of Winsted residents. Both of these articles listed the owners and or inhabitants of the cottages and other buildings around the lake, and the names of each structure were available. They had christened the bungalow Take It Easy, Takitezy. C. Middlebrooks was a retired sheriff of Litchfield County and He constructed the cottage with his wife Mary and their 7 children. Their land was originally part of the Herd Farm that was purchased for development by Burton E. Moore in the early 1900s. Moore's own summer house was built in the late 1800s on the edge of Highland Lake Farm of Rufus E. Holmes. The house was called the Oaks. The house was, and still is, 2 doors down the road toward the tablet on West Wakefield Boulevard that was dynamited in the late 1800s thanks to a $10,000 bequest from Harvey Wakefield to allow the dirt road to proceed around Highland Lake. Moore sold a piece of property to C.C. Middlebrooks in 1904, and he built his bungalow on the 2 lakefront lots. There you see a picture of Mr. Moore's home. The bungalow was later sold by Middlebrooks about 25 years later or so to an attorney named George F. Drake. Drake sold the properties to Joseph H. Cott and his wife, Antoinette T. Cott, in 1952. Dr. Cott was from Torrington and was the Bagnaschi family doctor. My wife's name was Joyce Bagnaschi, that delivered my wife Joyce at Charlotte Hungerford Hospital in Torrington, Connecticut. The Cott's only daughter, Janet, drowned in the lake as a result of a sailing accident when she was a teenager. The Cotts are said to have left the lake that day, and when they sold their properties 7 years or so later, they were transferred in the same condition as they were in on the day that Janet drowned. I found some mementos of Janet and her mother when we purchased the bungalow and gave them to elderly neighbors that were friends of the Cott family. In 1960, the Cotts sold the property to Arthur J. Ratti. He sold eventually to his daughters and 2 son-in-laws, William and Adelbert LaTulip, 2 brothers and friends of my childhood, that married Arthur J. Ratty's daughters, Joan and Dolores. I first became familiar with Frank H. DeMars and his well-known picture postcards featuring Winchester and surrounding areas that were taken during his lifetime when I began researching the history of the area into history books. The Centennial book was the Annals and Family Records of Winchester, Connecticut, the first 100 years of Winstead's history. Published in 1873, just after the first centennial in 1871, by John Boyd, a former Connecticut Secretary of State and a friend of former Torrington-born abolitionist John Brown. This book is commonly referred to as Boyd's Annal. The biennial book was Winstead and the Town of Winchester, subtitled Annals of Winchester, Volume 2. The second 100 years of Winstead's history, initially written by Frank H. DeMars and updated before publication by Elliot P. Bronson in time for the biennial. The books were reproduced in paperback versions recently as a public service by Winstead history buff Anthony Tony Canavo and were available at the town clerk's office in the Winstead Town Hall for a nominal fee. I purchased a few sets of these books and gave them to the selectmen, various commissions, boards, and the town manager in 2006. The 2 books are available in Winstead at the Beardsley and Memorial Library. Frank H. DeMars was born in 1872 and died in 1942. DeMars was a local resident born in the Robertsville section of Colebrook. He lived at 97 Williams Avenue in a house that was built by his father, Peter DeMars, in 1886 and still stands today. DeMars was a man of many interests and various occupations during his lifetime. His interests and occupations included farming, gardening, photography, history, civic issues, and other interests. He worked in Davidson's dry goods stores after school and pumped the organ at the Second Congregational Church on Main Street. He worked in C.K. Hunt's printing office and eventually owned and operated a local art retail store at 700 Main Street, expanding to 711, 715 Main Street in Winstead for 10 or 12 years until he sold it to a Mr. Holcomb and went into gardening and other endeavors. During his lifetime, DeMars was a very civic-minded person and volunteered to serve and help many local organizations. He was on the Planning and Zoning Commission. His eldest daughter, Martha Ruth DeMars Richards, said in her 1989 oral history of Mr. DeMars, taken by Cynthia Baldwin of the Colebrook Historical Society, that DeMars helped to establish a joint horticultural society with the town of New Hartford and was its first president. In 1930, he was a member of the Rotary Club. He suggested and campaigned to have Winsted named the Laurel City because of its abundance of mountain laurel. His photograph of his wife, Martha Ruth Harrison DeMars, amongst the laurel that you see before you, was in black and white, as were all his pictures, so it did not show the lovely red hair that she is said to have possessed. In 1931, the first selectman, William Kemp, invited the Women's Club, Kiwanis, Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, and Winchester Grange to appoint 2 members each to form a committee and carry out the plan to adopt the name Winsted, the Laurel City. In 1932, the Laurel City Horticultural Society was formed with DeMars as its first president. In 1934, the Horticultural Society suggested a plan for a Laurel Queen to be selected by a vote from the students at the Central School, now Pearson. In 1936, the Queen was crowned in Winchester Center in a field at the Bronson Farm. The early laurel festivals are reported to have been done on a laurel-covered hillside up in Winchester at the Bronson Farm, and later at the Corny Johnson property at a site that is now Farview State Park, thanks to the efforts of past town leaders. Over the years, the park became overgrown and was rehabilitated by work from volunteers organized and led by local resident Teresa Parsons Canavo. More importantly for Winsted history, Mr. DeMars was an excellent photographer in the black and white glass plate photographic area. Mr. DeMars learned the art of photography from various contemporaries that may have included fellow Robertsville native Una Klingen, definitely King T. Sheldon, and William Deming, and other photographers in the area. Bob Grigg, the Colebrook town historian, told me that when DeMars' contemporary Una Klingen's family left the area for Virginia, she sold her work and equipment to DeMars. I have been told DeMars perhaps desired to capture for posterity scenic and other pictures of the area with his camera on glass plates that were the state-of-the-art in his formative years. Later came the Brownie, but he was not known to have used a Brownie camera. He stuck with his original camera and glass plates. According to his daughter, Martha, his wife, Martha Ruth Harrison DeMars, developed the pictures from the glass plates and carefully saved them for posterity. Mr. DeMars had picture postcards made of many of the photographs that he and others had taken and sold them in his store on Main Street and in other locations throughout the area. The postcards requiring color were printed in Germany at the time. The postcards also included the photographs taken by his contemporaries as well as his own. They weren't signed, many of them, sometimes making it difficult to ascertain which glass plates were photographed by DeMars and which by his forefathers or contemporaries. Mr. DeMars drove his horse and carriage throughout the area to as many as 50 towns in Connecticut and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and Long Island to take the many very interesting photographs in his collection. Some, as you can see here, were hanging on the wall in his bedroom that is pictured before you. It is believed that DeMars was a very productive photographer from 1904, plus or minus, until around 1912 or so. Somehow, I found out that Mr. DeMars' oldest daughter, Martha Ruth DeMars Richards, was still alive at the age of 88 and living in her father's old house built by her grandfather at 97 William Street. I telephoned Martha and told her that Joyce and I were interested in her father's work. as an early photographer, and his well-known picture postcards of Highland Lake and elsewhere. I told her that we were looking for the possible existence of a postcard or glass plate negative with a picture taken by her father of the bungalow that we had recently purchased at Highland Lake that was built by C.C. Middlebrooks in the early 1900s. Martha was very cordial and pleasant and invited Joyce and I down to see her collection of her father's work. We found Martha a fine, lively, and interesting person at the time. We visited her for 3 hours or so and found her to be a very pleasant and astute woman who said that she didn't believe in taking pills and was very happy and very alert. She served us tea and cookies. The picture you see now is about the age she was when we went to visit her. It was her 90th birthday, 2 years after we visited her. Martha was a former school teacher nearby at the original Greenwood School, very near her house. She married Mr. Fred Richards sometime after his first wife passed away around 1960. Martha outlived her husband Fred by 15 or 20 years, I'm told. Martha was the stepmother of Fred Richards, the Winsted jeweler who owns and operates F&G Richards Jewelry Store on Main Street in Winsted. Fred never met his stepmother's father, Frank H. DeMars. Martha told us that she had done an oral history concerning her father in 1989, and that it was available at the Colebrook Historical Society. It's now available on their website. She was a very interesting woman and told us a lot about her father and other things of historical interest. When we visited Martha, she was very proud of her father. She was proud of Winsted and proud of accomplishments in the surrounding areas. We looked through the photograph albums, but could not find a photograph of our bungalow. During our time with Martha, she told us that she had sold all her postcard duplicates to Carl Colgren, a collector in Litchfield, who collected and sold a great deal of old postcards from all areas, and suggested that we contact him in search of our postcard. I visited Mr. Colgren at his home and couldn't find a postcard with a photograph of the bungalow. Mr. Colgren has since passed away, and members of his family may have some of Carl's huge postcard collection. While visiting Mr. Colgren, I did purchase some colored picture postcards made in Germany of the Gilbert home where Joyce's grandmother, Amelia Bias, was a resident as a young girl for a few years in the early 1900s. During the latter part of our stay, Martha mentioned that her father's glass plates, the negatives, were stored safely upstairs in her home. She said that there were about 1,000 of them. Her oral history taken in 1989 and read later states 1,000 of glass plates. She also said that she had the camera that Frank H. DeMars used to take the photographs. It was also safely stored upstairs in her home at 97 William Street. I thought that one of them might contain a picture of the bungalow, recognized the historical potential of the glass plates, and I was concerned about their safety should the house burn down or some other terrible accident occur. I suggested that she store them in a safer place for posterity and suggested the Winsted Historical Society. She said, "Oh no," because she believed, rightly or wrongly, that another photographer's glass plates were stored there and they were somehow ruined at some point in time. Glass plates can easily be ruined under certain conditions, excess moisture, for example. I next suggested that she donate the camera that Frank H. DeMars used to the Winsted Historical Society for safekeeping. And she said, "Oh no, it might be stored in a barn or an outbuilding somewhere on or off the property where no one will see it, and it might be damaged. No, I'll keep it here." I have recently been told that there may be evidence that Martha may have loaned out some plates from time to time to trusted individuals for a reproduction of Winsted's history. The Historical Society has since been given the camera and 2 others by the DeMars family for safekeeping. I next suggested that she consider the historical room that I often frequented at the local Beardsley and the Memorial Library And once again, she said no, because she felt that they would be safer if they remained in her possession and she could keep an eye on them. I then asked her if she would be amenable to having a professional photographer or some other expert develop the 1,000 plates so they could be published for all to see in a book. Martha was again reluctant and said no, because she didn't want to let the plates out of her reach and sight. Not giving up easy, I then asked her if we could have a professional photographer come to work in her home on 97 Williams Street and develop the plates under her supervision. No, she said. She didn't want anyone handling the plates as she feared for their condition and safety. Before we left, while sharing her hospitality of cookies and tea, we asked Martha many questions about her father, Frank H. DeMars. She said that as a child, she often rode with him in his horse-drawn carriage. She also said that he was an avid gardener, cultivating his backyard, as his father had done before him. Martha said that DeMars died in 1942 from injuries suffered from a fall from a tree while gardening in his backyard. Shortly after we visited Martha, I was discussing my interest in finding a postcard with a picture of the bungalow, Take It Easy, with my next-door neighbor, Stephen Valagorski. Steve said that owned by Highland Lake resident and postcard collector Willard R. Platt III. Steve thought that it might be our bungalow. I phoned Mr. Platt, and he did have a postcard of the bungalow. See that on the screen. I visited him, and he brought the card out and showed it to me. He didn't want to sell the card, but kindly let me take it to copy, which I did the same day, and promptly returned the card. The postcard had a picture of the bungalow that you see there. At an early stage of construction, it's on that point out there around the corner from the dirt road, and it's actually 2x4 construction before the siding was even put up. This picture was perhaps taken by Frank H. DeMars. We're not positive. It was taken around 1908. On the back of the postcard, there was a stamp of a flag with 13 stars, and it was used to postmark the date, 1908, over the 1-cent stamp. The card was addressed to Mr. Walter Christie, a friend of the Middlebrooks, at 99 Pearl Street in Torrington, Connecticut, about 7 miles away. The message on the back of the postcard reads, "This is a picture of our cottage, not finished. We thought it would be done for Labor Day, but it won't be for another week, and if it is warm, we would like you and Walt to come up. It will be nice. It will be complete next Saturday." Signed, Mary, the wife of C.C. Middlebrooks. To date, there is no positive proof that DeMars took the photograph, but it is very possible that he did. A few town residents came forward over the last few years with early pictures and memories of visiting the cottage, but it was in pretty bad shape with no solid foundation. It was on piers in the ground. The taxes and cost of maintenance were increasingly higher and prohibitive because of its location and proximity to the water. Joyce, my brother Dennis, and I, while waiting for permission to rebuild, with the help of some craftsmen, cleaned up and repaired the chimney, the structure, and the grounds. Once all of the permits and permission from the town were received a few years later, after a lot of thought and contemplation, we reluctantly demolished the bungalow and constructed a new, up-to-code structure that will provide many lucky owners much joy and happiness for a lifetime to come. There you see a picture of the bungalow after Joyce planted all the flowers and my brother and I repaired the building with the help of some workmen before it was torn down. Epilogue. In the year 2009, after a stay in a nursing home, Martha Ruth DeMars Richards, the oldest daughter of Frank H. DeMars, passed away at the age of 94, 6 years after we met her. One day, Joyce brought my attention to a local newspaper article about the DeMars glass plate negatives that were stored in the house at 97 Williams Avenue. As Martha's niece and Frank H. DeMars' granddaughter, Margaret Peg Giles, a retired newspaper photographer, and her husband were clearing Martha's home, they eventually found not the 1,000 glass plates mentioned to us by Martha, but close to 5,000 glass plate negatives while they were cleaning the attic in her aunt's home. With the help of many family members and historical society in her vicinity, Peg lives in Granby, and the latest computer, photographic, and internet technology, the Giles have devised a system to scan the glass plate negatives and load them on a DeMars website for the world to see, admire, and purchase. The majority of the glass plate negatives are in very good condition, but the total number posted and processed will be less than the 5,000 for various reasons. Some are scratched. They established a website that is no longer in existence, the www.demarsimages.com. While the site was in existence, there was an introduction and 5 categories of photographs to choose from: a home section, a towns section, a section of portraits, an About Us section that told you a bit about Peg and her activities, and a Frequently Asked Questions section. The site was interactive and you could have sent or received information. There were about 5,000 scanned photographs on the website, divided into the 6 major categories. The photographs are black and white, very clear, magnificent quality, and divided into separate categories for ease of access. The major categories were towns, various people, prominent men in town, prominent women in town, various things like that. Unknown photographs. Peg was looking for people to comment on, and I've commented on a couple, and friends of mine have commented on a few. She tried to find out, what are these unknown photographs? Where were they taken? In which of the 50 cities that DeMars took pictures in? Towns and cities around the area. Transportation, humor. Each of these categories, these major categories, were broken down for ease of access into subcategories. For example, portraits. Portraits were divided into categories, subcategories. Children, mixed groups, women, men, sports and recreation. We have DeMars family photographs, performing arts groups, portraits, St. Anthony's School, the Gilbert School, animals and portraits, beautiful photographs. Each picture could be enlarged for viewing and was for sale in various quantities, sizes, and prices. I purchased some for use on this program. Each was personally cleaned of scratches and other blemishes by Peg Giles, if practical, after they were sold and before delivered to a customer. It took Peg an average of 6 minutes per plate to accomplish scanning each picture, labeling it, and putting it on the website. So when you multiply that by 6 minutes times 5,000 or so pictures, it gives you an idea of how long it took to go through all pictures. It was about 3 years. Pretty much solid work for Peg. To clean each picture, to make it ready for someone to purchase, took far longer than 6 minutes each. Tremendous time variation exists depending on how heavily damaged the picture was. Peg only cleaned when someone ordered a picture, so not that many have been cleaned, but more may be as time goes by. One of which, of course, was our picture. Take it easy. Peg has donated all the glass plate negatives, approximately 4,500 or more, to the Connecticut Historical Society in Hartford, Connecticut. The hope is that they will soon all be online and available to the general public. In the meantime, if you are interested, you can contact the Connecticut Historical Society, find out how to use their website, and ask them any questions that you might have prior to donating to the Connecticut Historical Society. Peg sold the pictures in a big range of sizes, all printed on Kodak paper at a professional lab on the West Coast, before the portraits were sold. There is an unknown category that's mostly buildings and roads, where Peg was looking for feedback and getting plenty from anyone who could identify the subject matter and or its location. There is an ironic twist to this story from Joyce, and my perspective. When processing the glass plates, Peg found and posted on the internet a damaged picture of Take It Easy, taken sometime shortly after 1908, after that original postcard photograph was taken. She brought it to my attention, and I looked at it on the website. Peg had read my draft script and had remembered cleaning and posting a badly damaged photo under the Winsted Residences subcategory, photo number at the time 361, of a cottage with a sign on its front with the name Take It Easy. The large black blob that you see on the left and white that you see next to it is major damage. One pass at retouching by Peg and another pass by her very smart cousin, Elizabeth DeMars Bayes, who often gives Peg very, very good advice. Martha Ruth DeMars Richards was very concerned and very protective with her father's glass slides because she feared that they would somehow be damaged in one way or another. Thanks to her diligence, wise decision-making, and protective tenacity over many years, the severely damaged glass slides are relatively few. But ironically and unfortunately, one of them is the glass slide of our bungalow, Take It Easy. That was on the website. I am very thankful for the picture, even though it was badly damaged, and will hang it on a wall in Take It Easy 2, the new building. Thank you, Frank, Martha, and Peg. I purchased the photograph, the damaged photograph of Take It Easy, from DeMars Images, and brought it to a professional photographer at the photo shop in the north end of Torrington, Connecticut. Once the restoration was completed, I sent a copy to Peg, and she was very impressed. The photo shop, where I had photographic restoration work done previously on old family photographs, is very thorough. Michelle Marcella, an excellent photographic restorer, did the restoration that you see before you now. Michelle and the Photoshop did a wonderful job, and I can't thank them enough. It's a very complex process of cloning and touch-up and all that kind of thing, but they did a good job. You see it there before you. I also, at the same time, took the yellowed photographs that I had made of the original postcard and had them placed in black and white, eliminated the yellow coloring that 100 years does to a postcard. You see that now? That's the first front of the card. A little better there. It just looked like a white rectangle there, but that's the building being built, the process of being built. And then you can see the back of the card, a little easier to read perhaps than the yellowed version. So now I have two versions of that postcard, one with the yellowing, natural 100 years worth of yellowing, and one that was where the yellowing was removed. Many years after retiring, John Dewan was closing his building, Super Saver, on Main Street, and he had some pictures for sale that were done by Frank H. DeMars. They were hanging on his walls in the building. Two of them were of interest to me. One was 4 pieces of a picture put together hanging on the back entrance to his store depicting Highland Lake in 1912, a few years after Take It Easy, the bungalow, was built. So I purchased that picture from him, even though it was divided into 4 pieces, and I hung it up in the new building that we had built over the years after the bungalow was torn down. It took us a long time to get permits, get our act together. First we wanted to add on to the 211 house, a nice kitchen for Joyce and for visitors, and then we tackled that. The other picture was the Gilbert home. That was just 1 piece. I purchased that as well, and I have that hanging in the 211 house up on the hill, the home, because Joyce's grandmother was in the Gilbert home, Amelia Serbeck, the beginning of the 1900s, when her mother went back to Hungary while she was a young child. Her father stayed with the 3 children and put them in the Gilbert home. He worked in a factory in Torrington. They were in the home for about 3 years, and while they were there, he walked to Winsted and back every weekend and on holidays and vacations to visit his children. So I bought that picture as well. It's a big picture, probably 4 feet by 4 feet, 3 feet by 3 feet, somewhere, I didn't measure it, and that's hanging. The other thing I found, actually somebody gave it to me, was a picture of the inside of the original bungalow, a fireplace and some chairs. I've got that hanging now in the new building. And I also found a picture of a bend in the Highland Lake Road that was right near the bungalow. It was taken by Frank H. DeMars and put on one of his postcards that he sold from his store in Winsted. Had no writing on the back, but it was in a frame. That picture was given to me by the descendants of one of the original owners. You can see a picture of that frame, and it's in the same sort of frame that the picture that was also given to me by descendants of the original owners is hanging up. And now you see it. You see that picture. So anyway, that's a little addition that happened recently. Perhaps he should have a monument in the park downtown. Wouldn't that be nice? I did nominate him for a few things when I was on the Economic Development Commission. The selectmen were in favor of Finance Board, but for one reason or another, none of it ever happened. But he was a great man, one of the best we've had. Joyce in her kitchen at Highland Lake, an area she loved. This series is dedicated to my wife, Joyce. I was married to her for 57 years, and she brought me joy through our dating and our marriage, and helped me a lot in the preparation of all the programs I did over the years and all the help I gave to neighbors in the area. I am sure that she's resting in peace